Okay, well, we're going to wait for some people to join now that we go live and continue to have a conversation. I'm sure anybody who joins and hears us talking about their favorite games will certainly find that to be enjoyable banter.
All right. Seth, what are you playing these days?
I play whatever my son wants to play, which is still heavy Fortnite and Minecraft. I tried to get him to play Call of Duty, but he says it's too violent. So
how old is he?
He's 11.
Okay.
Excuse me one second.
Do you guys remember? I'm trying to remember the name. It's like at the tip of my brain. It's like called God's Hammer or God's Hand, and it's not an FPS. It's more so like a fighting game, but it's still like a sort of like a Destiny, but with like swords and different kind of powers. That's not gun based. Have you guys heard of
Looks
that?
Looks like
game?
Chris Laporte has chimed in and said God Hand.
God Hand, there you go.
He is reliable for all of this.
He is.
Thanks, Chris.
For those of you that are joining us, we are going to wait a few more minutes for some more attendees to join. But we are chatting here live from Las Vegas, LA, and Chicago, and have attendees from all over the world, actually. I do see a few people logged in internationally. So excited to have you all here today, and we will be starting in a few more moments.
Welcome, everyone. If you have games you want us to talk about, feel free to put them in chat. But yeah, Cyberpunk, man, I'm all about it. Every time it gets pushed out, my heart breaks a little bit more. But I'm still very excited. I was in the audience when Keanu Reeves did his breathtaking presentation.
Ooh.
One of the most exciting moments of that show that I can remember.
I am a little sad that they made it first person instead of third person. I'm not sure how I'm going to feel about that now.
I think it'll be kind of cool to like walk through that world. But at least what I've been led to believe is going to be, pretty exciting. Like I don't mind first person, but then I play a lot of FPS, so I kind of got over the seasickness pretty quick.
Yeah, I mean.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you all for joining us. My name is Seth Shore. I'm one of the co-founders and co-directors of the Nevada Esports Alliance. As I mentioned, we are here live from Las Vegas, LA, and Chicago. Really excited to have you all here today. Thank you to our panelists in advance. We really, really appreciate your time today. And hopefully we'll see you in person in the future. With that, I'm going to pass this over to our host and MC today, Dr. Brett Abarbanel.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us virtually. It is such a pleasure to have you all here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Brett Abarbanel. I'm the Director of Research at UNLV's International Gaming Institute. And along with Seth and Chris Purcell and Chris Laporte, whom you will see in the attendees here, we are the directors of the Nevada Esports Alliance. For those of you who don't know, Nevada Esports Alliance is a nonprofit organization that we founded in 2017 here in Las Vegas, though we do, of course, serve all of Nevada, with the goal of promoting best practices at the intersection of esports video games and the global tourism industry. Nevada, of course, famous for its gold standard in gambling and betting regulation, as well as having a massive tourism infrastructure that really serves to support major events like esports, and as we're learning through this pandemic, many other facets of the video games and esports industries. So today, I'm extremely excited to bring this panel to you here. We have some wonderful panelists to talk about the future of this digital transformation in video games and esports. And they'll be covering a variety of different topics, largely centering around the marketing and communications involved with esports. I do want to say a particular welcome to our members who are here in the audience, whom I can see, as well as all of our visitors. Since we do have a lot of visiting attendees today, I do want to let our members know that as this was originally meant to be one, in person, and two, include our annual members meeting. We will be doing that via email or via another virtual session rather than crunch it all into the 1 hour today. I know there is a limit to everybody's patience when it comes to sitting and staring at faces on screens for a full hour. So thank you so much. I will be the MC. Brief housekeeping, as is normal with these sorts of things. We do have the chat open. Please feel free to use it. We also have the Q&A element of this webinar open. Again, please feel free to use it. As Nicola does the moderation of this panel, she will be keeping an eye on that. We may not get to your question immediately, but please do know that we will see it and we will do our best to make sure that we're able to field everything. So with that, I would love to introduce the panel. We are going to start with a brief presentation from Nicola Piggott, who is here, the founder of the Story Mob, and she will give her own bios. We talked about, we like to have folks do their own introductions so that people like Brett Abarbanel don't botch it horribly. Nicola will be giving a brief presentation on what she has the 7 commandments, different from the original 10, 7 commandments of esports communication. And then we'll launch into a moderated discussion with our other 2 panelists here. We have Ross Huberman, who is the Senior Manager of Marketing at ESL, and Keisha Howard, who is the founder of Sugar Gamers. And I'm so thrilled to have the 3 of you here. Thank you once again. And with that, I will turn it over to Nicola to get started.
Of course. Hi, guys. Welcome, everybody, to today's panel. Wish we were with you in the sweltering desert. But, you know, hopefully another year, another time, we can all start to congregate again and talk about games. But today, as Brett said, we're going to be walking through a few things, talking about marketing and communications around esports and gaming, and then having a pretty freewheeling discussion about some of the things that come up. So I'm going to do a very quick walkthrough of a presentation that we put together to explain a little bit more about how we approach esports and marketing communications. The Story Mob is a communications firm that specializes in competitive gaming and digital entertainment. And my background is, prior to that, I worked in global communications at Riot. For those who don't know, Riot is the developer and publisher of League of Legends and also of Valorant. So forgive me, Ross and Keisha, for abandoning you guys for a quick interlude while we get into this. I'm going to share my screen flawlessly and hope that this works out. Okay. All right. I'm hoping everyone can see this. If you can't, let us know in chat, and we will adjust accordingly. This being the middle of a pandemic, I can't tell you how many snafus and pets in the background and children bringing in nappies I've been able to sit through in the last couple of days and find pretty entertaining. So as we talked about, there's no real, and forgive me while I scroll to exactly where I was hoping to be. The reason we put together a series of commandments for esports and gaming communications is mainly because in today's climate particularly, but you know, throughout the history of gaming, brands and mainstream audiences have consistently misunderstood how to speak to a gaming audience. It's the reason why the Story Mob was founded. I suspect as we get into panel discussion, we'll be able to talk about 1 or 2 of the frustrations that we see when it comes to gamers being represented in the wider world. So we really wanted to get some thoughts down in terms of how brands in particular, but publishers, anybody coming to gaming from an outside position can speak to gamers in a way that's effective and creative. So as Brett said, we have 7 commandments, not 10. 10 felt a little too biblical. And I will walk through these super quickly, and then hopefully we can, you know, talk about them in discussion as we talk about some other stuff. So whenever a brand is looking to speak to a gaming audience, the first thing that we always advise that they do is create value. I am a strong believer in the fact that gamers, esports fans, streaming audiences are one of the most demanding audiences in history. This is an audience that has grown up with entertainment on tap, free, on demand, and abundant. Right? This isn't somebody who's had to wait for a weekly serial of their favorite show, as I did when I was a kid, or have to get their gaming content, where they could find it. So any brand entering into the esports space needs to be aware of what they are adding to the industry. So whether that's creating a new form of entertainment, whether that's propping up an existing esport through sponsorship, whether that's sponsoring somebody's favorite streamer in order to help them keep creating the kind of content that the fan likes. A brand needs to prove its worth in order to enter this space successfully. Long gone are the days where you could just slap your brand onto an esports team, sport, stadium, and call it a day. So absolutely recommend. It's not enough to play. Some good examples of this. We call on Intel, and I should mention this is part of a white paper. If you're interested in checking it out, and how could you be not after this flawless presentation of it, you can check it out at thestorymog.com. We have a couple of white papers available, but this one is called the 7 Commandments of Esports Communications. But yeah, as we say, you need to be all in to get anything back. Intel, as I was mentioning, and Ross, I know you will know about this, have a long relationship with the esports community, have sponsored and created tournaments that otherwise wouldn't exist, that are now part of the esports landscape. So that's a really great example of somebody not just showing up with logo in hand, but really creating value. Be authentic. The other thing that everybody should know about esports fans, if you don't already know, is they can sniff out bullshit quicker than any sports fans in history. You cannot fake it. You cannot, fudge your way around specific knowledge and fool an esports fan or a gaming fan. Some good examples of this, teams and fans are the best people at showing you where you need to be really specific. A brand that comes in and launches a social media campaign of, hello fellow gamers, gets even the smallest detail wrong, is likely to be, crucified online, and rightfully so. Something that happened recently, I don't know if everybody saw this, but Burger King, through their agency Ogilvy, tried a what they called a guerrilla marketing campaign, where they came into streamers' streams and abuse the donation button in order to get the automatic voice to extol the virtues of, like, a $5 meal, something along those lines. That's not the way to go. They tried to gain free advertising by taking advantage of the streamers, essentially, and the community rose up in protest. Streamers create a genuine service and need to be compensated for that service. Because of that, they were roundly criticized by the community, and being pretty justified. But yeah, be authentic. Sorry, like I said, Zoom issues. But luckily, I know these off by heart, having presented them a ton of times. Commandment 3, be timely. Esports is one of the fastest moving sports in the world, not just because we've been able to play our game online, which over the last year has been really tested to its limit in terms of how quickly we've been able to pivot when our offline tournaments, just like the ones that we've all attended in Vegas, were no longer able to happen. It's also fast moving because it's a immediate and quick dialogue that happens online. So at the Story Mob, there's a lot of us who worked in PR back in the day. And one of the anecdotes that we like to talk about is my first job, let's say in PR at around sort of 2003, 2004. If a client called me with a crisis, we used to hit a physical time clock and say, you know, we have like maybe 24 hours to come up with a solution. These days, if something happens online, you have probably less than 5 minutes in order to process, respond, and come back with something that deals with the problem. Esports fans and gamers generally are not willing to wait. This is, again, an audience who's used to getting all of their information digitally, who's used to you know, engaging in super quick dialogue, and who are used to tearing people apart for mistakes that they make online. So being timely and dealing with terrifying crises as and when they pop up is incredibly important. Crises will happen. We're a young industry still, relatively young, even though we feel like we're doing every day. So it's super important that everyone's thinking on their feet. Be media savvy. This one is a little bit more focused on sort of the differences between traditional sports. One of the things hopefully we'll get to talk about today is how we find ourselves with in this relationship at the moment with traditional sports, where because of the restrictions of a pandemic, traditional sports are being forced to take a bit more of a back seat. And digital sports are starting to lead the fore in terms of, you know, continuing to engage with their fans, even while physical things are impossible. And something really interesting that's happened over the last 24 hours, as everybody knows, are a ton of NVEA teams, you know, taking a stance against some of the issues that they see. The one area that I still consider us a little behind in esports and in digital entertainment is our relationship with traditional media. There's a couple of reasons for that. Traditional media has struggled to keep up with gaming as a whole, but if we were to use it and to harness it correctly, as we try and do in our work with Story Mob, it's, you know, it's one of the best possible methods to amplify our voices, to not seek to be defined by the mainstream, but educate the mainstream. I think we're all hopefully young enough to say, or old enough to say in this instance, that our parents' generation and our grandparents' generation find this digital world in which we all work and operate somewhat bewildering. The critical thing here is that some of the decision makers, for example, brand heads, people who could fund and further our sport, still belong to that generation. So using a media relationship in order to explain it a little is definitely a smart way to go. I won't go into all the ways that you can use media, but if you've read the Ninja issue of Hollywood Reporter, you'll know what I'm talking about. Commandment 5, be transparent. This sits hand in hand with be timely. Again, this is an audience that requires that you are straightforward in your motives and your values, more so than any generation in history. So the brands that we work with in esports and in gaming constantly fight a battle of trying to be as upfront and as transparent as possible when they're discussing each and every move. It's no longer the time where you could just put out news and not talk about your motivations going into it. So you'll see companies in this day and age laying out their plans for, you know, 2 to 3 years down the line, their values, even their financials and their internal emails in a bid to gain digital audiences' trust. It's never been more important, and it's never been more hard to secure. So being transparent is at the core of what every brand should be thinking about within within this audience. We give some examples of transparency, and one that I've just scrolled past is a client of ours, Team Liquid, who, as part of applying for a franchise in the League of Legends ecosystem, puts a staggering amount of work into a fully transparent application, which they then put online to give, like, to give their fans a reason to root for them, a reason to feel like they were included. Commandment 6, be truthful about who you are. Again, sit side by side with transparency, but there's a difference to saying, for example, we are the most player-friendly team in the ecosystem, and then getting caught trying to shortchange a pro on their wages. These two things don't line up. You need to say your values, but you also need to live up to your values. And again, this is an audience that will absolutely pin you to the wall if you are not living up to the things that you're saying. If you're a brand, for example, that's entering esports for the first time and says, you know, we can't wait to invest in gaming, in esports, and get to know this audience, and then 3 months down the line you fade and no longer put any effort or funding into the audience, you're dead to them forever, pretty much. I won't go into it here, but we give an example of a pretty nefarious owner who invested in an amateur League of Legends team, put out some very self-congratulatory communications about how amazing this was and how he wanted to change the landscape. Needless to say, this does not have a happy ending. The team involves multiple players unpaid and a couple of big scandals, and the guy will obviously never work in esports ever again. And Commandment 7, be bold. We could talk about this as a group in a little bit, but I strongly believe that is where you can take a risk, where you can jump onto creative ideas, you know, without the weight of, let's say, 100 years in the case of the NBA or the NHL, of tradition that would preclude you from taking that kind of risk. Some of the most creative and engaging content comes out of the esports and gaming ecosystem. If you've ever tuned into a team channel and watched the team, you know, create just vignettes about themselves, if you've ever tuned into a gaming stream and seen some of the most creative stuff really that you're going to see in the broadcasting landscape, you'll know what I'm talking about. I want to give a special shout out to a streamer called Sushi Dragon. I don't know if anybody's ever seen him. He's on the edge of sort of digital content and gaming, but he creates amazing, immersive, almost what I'd call kind of drinkable internet streams where he dances, he plays, he chats. He's watching him is like watching your brain go through a ringer in the most pleasurable way. So, like I said, esports, gaming, excellent place to take a risk. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I am going to hand over to my fellow panelists to let them introduce themselves, talk a little bit about themselves and what they do, and then we can move on to talking more generally about our approaches towards esports, gaming, marketing, events, and what we'd recommend in the space. Russ, I will start with you.
Awesome. Thanks, Nicola. Appreciate it. Really, really insightful stuff. Everything rings true. Wanted to thank Brett and Seth for having me, and all the panelists. You know, excited about Keisha's really, really unique perspective here as well. And then obviously all the participants as well. Thanks for joining us. As mentioned, I'm Ross Huberman. I am the Senior Manager of Marketing at ESL, the world's largest esports company. My past, just really quickly, is mostly in the traditional sports sphere. So a lot of what Nicola touched on, you know, is very interesting to me, and I think I kind of have been able to bring that perspective over to esports. I've been in esports for about 2 years now. It's been a wild ride. It's certainly a daunting task to kind of try to, you know, understand the entirety of the industry, but I'm hoping kind of through some of the conversation we had today, you can come away with some takeaways and a better understanding of how all these things work. So Excited for the rest of the panel, and I'll throw it over to Keisha.
Hey, everybody. Again, thanks for having me here. Thank you, Ross. Thank you. I learned a lot, Nicola, from your presentation. That was amazing. So I started Sugar Gamers during the last recession 11 years ago. It was all about inclusive communities, emerging markets, and consumer behaviors. I wanted the video game industry and video game players to be more inclusive to women and people of color. And that led me on a very interesting adventure. And now I'm here. So, and just like sort of understanding the foundation of some of the disparities that are within the video game industry, specifically within esports, and some of the solutions to that, and some of the ways that we can all show up and be authentic and inclusive in those spaces. So.
All right, thanks, guys. Well, let's talk a little bit about the year we've been having. It's been unprecedented for all of us. I can say, you know, for us, it's been a double-edged sword. On one side, we've kind of never been busier in terms of, you know, how digital sports and entertainment has become so central to people's lives. And on the other hand, you know, there's an element of survivor's guilt here. We feel very responsible for bringing together communities in ways that, you know, we've taken for granted so far, and we miss seeing fans at esports events and stuff like that. So interesting year all around. Ross, how's it been from the event and tournament organizer side of things? Obviously, you guys have had the most dramatic pivot. Can you talk a little bit about how it's been?
Yeah, it's been obviously an interesting and trying year. You know, for those not familiar, ESL, I mean, we typically do about 12 to 14 global events a year. In, you know, like I said, all over the globe. We had 2 in the US and 19, but, you know, huge events in Germany and Europe more broadly, you know, selling out large, you know, NBA sized arenas. And so, you know, I mean, we had events scheduled in Los Angeles in March, for example, ready to go in a game called Dota. It was a major, kind of the first time that a major had come to the States. We were super excited, had the building sold out, and then kind of the pandemic hit. We were teetering back and forth on kind of what to do. You know, 100 different scenarios at play. Do we bring the players in but no fans? Do we, you know, make the event completely online? I think, you know, the one thing I'll mention, and you know, we've actually, in hindsight, haven't missed a broadcast day in 2020, which is completely insane and incredible, especially when you juxtapose that to the ways in which the traditional sports leagues have had to handle the pandemic, and the time and energy and resource that it took just to get to play, you know, several months later. So I think obviously esports at its core is incredibly digital. It's just, you know, we are so fortunate to have that ability to kind of turn on a switch. That's not to say that there's not teams in our German headquarters who worked hours and hours and hours to ensure that we were, you know, delivering a high quality broadcast, regardless of the locale, regardless of a venue, regardless of everything that went into creating a live event experience. We've really been able to level up that digital experience. You know, I've seen stuff like fan cams, I've seen player cams, ISO cams, all the things that level up the experience as a fan. You know, and I'll be lying to you if I'm saying that it's equal to the live event experience. I mean, that's what I was brought in to do, is to you know, enhance the fan experience for those in the US live at events, and also from a brand perspective, right? There's definitely a loss there. You're not having that one-to-one communication. You're not able to talk to fans. You're not able to show them things or demo things. You know, all the things that make a brand execution and a brand activation on site valuable. We're really having to reshape how we're doing that digitally. But to Nicola's point, we've seen a an insane, and this is partly due to COVID, partly due to just being stuck inside. All the factors, we've seen a massive increase in viewership. But what are we going to do kind of in the future to ensure that those viewers aren't coming in one ear and out the other? We need to figure out ways to further engage them and ensure that they, when hopefully, crossing my fingers, when events do come back, in whatever form or fashion, we're hoping that they do, the audience returns stronger, more engaged, more in tune with what we do as a whole, and use this time as a positive versus all the negative we see in the world.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and hopefully we can talk a little bit as well about how gamers are increasingly tackling social issues. But Keisha, first of all, I'd love to hear how your year has been. It feels like gaming has become even more critically important in terms of maintaining sanity and community and all that good stuff. How do you see that? How's your year changed from where you thought you would be?
Oh man, it's been a flavor of chaos that's new to me, but it's filled with opportunities. So never before in the previous years has developing emerging markets in the video game industry been as important and prioritized to larger companies, because usually you can just imitate a previous success and, all right, we see that the ninja sort of structure works, so we're going to put everybody through that funnel and show everyone that kind of content. But I think that 2020 has really tapped into the diverse perspective of gamers, why they play, why they watch, why they show up, why they buy. And we are discovering even more reasons that are nuanced, yet very important to tapping into different markets, different communities. So not only that, there are different demographics of individuals who didn't think that gaming was for them, or wasn't necessarily educated about why esports is important. And now we have a captive audience, because what else are people going to be doing? So it's been great, because now, we can try some more things, because being in this industry and having this pandemic and everything else that's involved with this year, it does kind of suck, but again, the opportunities are numerous to experiment and explore and develop, because if we didn't have this time, we would be doing business as usual, right? We would be having our live events, we'd be talking about E3, we'd be talking about all the things, we'd be having an Evo somewhere around now, and now I feel like this year is kind of cleansing to the video game industry, and now we can step into it in a more ethical, in a more experimental, and a more sort of humane way. And businesses who do demonstrate ethics and transparency are going to see a lot of benefit from that return on experience rather than a return on investment, which will lead eventually to more consumer loyalty, because gamers want to be spoken to directly. They don't want to be glommed into, that they want their own individual sort of nuanced identities to be recognized and included, because they are immersing themselves in gameplay. And they also know that they are an important audience. So this is a great time to really take a more human focused approach to how do you want to sort of attract people to your brand, and how do you want to keep them engaged? Because one of the other things that I'm finding by being so immersed in the communities is that the loyalty idea of it is very long term, and it's not like a short term thing. So if a brand is able to speak directly to their intended audience in a way that is enriching, and not just data mining, not just buy this because you're a gamer, not because of the really shallow, superficial things that we've been able to get away with in this industry for a couple of decades, but between the movements that have occurred with Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement and so on and so forth, and it finally hitting the gaming industry. Now is a really great time to really look at the brand that you want to put out there and how you want to engage, but not necessarily just from a financial gain standpoint, because you can actually be again, a more ethical company, and it will in the long run return financial you'll see that. But right now we don't have the metrics for that because we haven't been sort of tackling the video game industry or the esports industry in that way.
So let's talk about that a little bit. I like what you said about, you know, gamers sort of know now how important they are. Like if they didn't know before this, they certainly know now, right? The power, the collective power of an industry that has this kind of buoyancy during these complicated times. So what I think there's been a really interesting window during this year, particularly when you know, various industries that to some degree have overshadowed gaming in the past have floundered, be that traditional sports, be that, you know, kind of film and entertainment, and gaming and digital culture has been able to, you know, kind of really reassert itself and its importance in ways that I think are going to be really interesting for the next couple of years. I'm curious, and this is for either of you, whether you see, you know, kind of activations in the market through brands or through companies or through teams or anybody else in the ecosystem that has kind of underscored this sense of possibility within the market.
Keisha, I'll let you go first.
All right. I was going to pass it to you.
Yeah, I think just to underscore kind of your entire point, right? In terms of the mainstream focus and mainstream connection that gaming and esports has kind of risen to during the pandemic, I think it's been insane, right? I mean, you know, just again, coming from a traditional sports background and having that kind of be my both professional and personal focus, and in the conversations I have with friends and colleagues and former colleagues, you know, there's just this overwhelming sense that, you know, esports, you know, I think it's come to be understood as something that's next, and there's something to be said about kind of, you know, kind of laying in the grass and being kind of on the forefront, but I think it's really been blown out here during the pandemic. Like it really has risen to a level that probably has made a lot of brands rethink strategy, a lot of audiences, you know, feel a sense of ownership or pride over the things that they've been doing and saying for so many years. And I think to your point, like the digital piece of this is so innate and so natural to this space that the space is already ready to go, right? And it's just going to be a complete spring pole to getting these kind of things off the ground. And it just has sped up that process. You know, would have taken years, I think. The pandemic has sped up that process, and now gaming esports are completely at the forefront of kind of this new digital savvy audience. If it wasn't already, right? I mean, I think that's the other piece of this, right? I mean, I think industry insiders and people who have done this and seen this have certainly seen it coming. And I think it's just more about the broad landscape. You talked about traditional media. I mean, I think that's another piece of this. I don't think everyone is quite on board or has a deep understanding. But this process has certainly sped that up. And I think sitting here from our perspectives, I think we'll be in a better place for it.
I definitely agree. I think that all of this has expanded the conversation in very important ways. So instead of video games just being competition, it's also technological, it's also creative, it's also administration. So now we can start highlighting, you know, even more types of I guess what I'm trying to say. So like right now, you know, we have your athlete, your esports athlete, and you have your professional streamer. And for a long while, that was seen as the top two ways to be a part of this narrative, to be a part of this industry. Like I have to be streaming all the time, or either I have to be good at games, personality or competition. Now we are being forced to re-examine how we're using technology, how we're creating the story, and how we're involving people in a number of different ways that are overlapping in this industry. That not only is all about entertainment, but that can reach into education, that can reach into, you know, again, solving problems. Like, you know, Borderlands had a very interesting sort of approach to this, for example, where they had a mini game where supposedly if you played it, you are contributing to data that could be used for COVID or something to that effect. And I thought that that was really interesting because now gamers are seeing not only like, hey, I'm valued for what I produce, but I can have a positive contribution and a positive impact simultaneously, technologically, scientifically. And I think that's really important because there's so many different nuanced identities in this space that we don't have to just try to imitate previous successes, but we could actually innovate for real this time. You know, like we're not have to look at the data and be like, well, 3 months ago, this made $1 million. So we'll make this very small tweak and we'll make $2 million. That's great, but it's not a long-term game plan in a world that is pivoting very quickly toward using gaming as not only entertainment, education, medical training, simulations, military, so on and so forth. And we can have a more realistic conversation that involves so many more people. And that's where I think we're at. I'm very excited about that element, those opportunities, because now people can actually, who say they're creative, can be creative. Like, what new things are we going to see? What kinds of technology are going to like really stand apart from everyone else? Like live events and experiential, you know, sort of experiences and all that good stuff, they're going to come back, they're going to be great. But now that people can participate in other ways simultaneously, we're going to see how that looks this year, and you know, probably next year. So like there is an opportunity and a challenge, and I think that I am very much looking forward to seeing what comes out of that.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about, so you raised a few of the social issues like just then and also earlier. And I think another interesting thing that we're seeing in esports and gaming in this sort of, you know, world in which we have so much of an increased spotlight on us is gamers realizing their power to not just address social issues, but potentially engender change that go along with those issues. For anyone who's not aware, not only was gaming really involved in the Black Lives Movement throughout the whole of this year, but gaming and esports particularly also had a sort of a Me Too moment over the last few months, where it's really coming to reckoning with, you know, some of the issues of diversity and of community that have held it back. How hopeful are you guys, not to delve into a whole like is gaming diverse question, but how hopeful are you guys that the community as a whole is you know, coming to a better understanding about what it means to have multiple voices represented, and what it means to truly be, you know, diverse and inclusive, even while we're still in our teenage years, essentially?
I mean, well, one of the things that's so amazing about gaming is that it's so immersive. You put yourself into the character, you put yourself into the environment, you put yourself into it. And, you know, again, large companies, they look at data, but if the data never included a diverse audience, how are large companies ever going to expand or develop emerging markets? And so these movements, like though uncomfortable, will, if companies are actually looking and listening and observing what's happening, there is plenty of financial opportunity while being ethical. Like, it costs less to be a good person now than it did in the past. And that's so promising to me, because now companies aren't just like, all right, we're going to make a ton of money doing this, but then they have to pay a ton of money for, you know, PR disasters later. So now, like, we can start from a foundation where I think there's going to be a natural sort of transparency, a natural sort of turn to ethics. And yes, it's not as immediately like, oh, I know what my profit margins are going to be, but it's going to be better for all of us, from the consumer all the way up to the people that are making the hundreds of millions of dollars. So, you know, and we'll all have a better time for it, and we'll all have more opportunities, especially in a space that's so expansive and important to tech education, to STEM. You know, a lot of times people, like, it's just been recently that video games are even included in the STEM conversation in a very realistic way beyond entertainment. So these conversations are again, in my opinion, sort of scrubbing and cleansing this industry a bit. And I think that it will be more immediately promising. I'm, again, as uncomfortable as it's been, this has been the work that I've contributed to for the last 11 years. So I'm very happy, and I'm hoping that I can get more people to see the opportunities in this space.
Yeah, I would say generally, one of the things I think that's very beautiful about gaming and esports that I've seen thus far is really inclusivity and community. It really is, and it's talked about a lot, and it probably sounds cliche, but it really is true. I mean, we see kids who have never come to an event before, who maybe have never had friends who they shared interests with or play games with, find inclusivity, find community online. And I thought that's just a kind of a beautiful thing. Now, on the flip side, I think there still is a long way to go, not only in terms of diversity, but just in general toxicity. I think that's a bad rap that gamers get generally. I think partly to their own doing, but I think I'm really proud, and a little bit of a shameless plug here. ESL works with an organization called NVEA that's really taking a stand and pushing for diversity and inclusion in gaming. And we have a member of our team, at ESL, who works really closely with some other academics who are really pushing that narrative and helping to really build and grow and push those storylines within the space, and highlight people who are doing things that push those conversations forward. A cool just little nugget we have with NVEA is we have something called the Good Luck Have Fun Pledge. Essentially, it's a kind of a code of ethics, cornerstone piece of rules and responsibilities that you can read through and pledge to take online. And once you sign it, you can get a little Twitch badge. So anytime you're online, you can kind of show others that, hey, I'm in this to ensure that I'm being a positive steward of inclusivity and diversity in the space. So, just as all other industries are kind of going through a little bit of a cleansing, an understanding of how can we be better morally, ethically, I think there's always more that we can do. But I've been really proud of our company in general and the space as a whole for the steps we've taken to ensure that those conversations don't end, and we're continuing to kind of better ourselves in the industry as a whole.
So first of all, a little bit of housekeeping. If anyone has any questions they want us or the panel to tackle, feel free to throw them into chat or into Q&A, and we'll handle them in the last couple of minutes. But I want to give a quick nod to our virtual host city of Vegas. I've obviously enjoyed multiple trips to Vegas, as have we all, but most of them esports related, major events, finals and conferences, that kind of thing. what in an age where obviously physicality is difficult, I'm sure many of the people listening are, you know, may have questions about how local businesses, local bodies, local folks can get involved in esports, in gaming, in communities, you know, while we're in this period of uncertainty. We're certainly not going to be huddled together around, you know, a large arena stage anytime soon, but can you see any other ways that, you know, these kind of local advocates and local groups can get involved in esports while we're getting back up on our feet events-wise?
Well,
You go.
Okay.
I see you, Keisha. You got it.
Well, first and foremost, anyone who's trying to get involved should probably not necessarily become like a hardcore gamer, but play some games for real. Play games with your kids, play games for yourself. Just play it to kind of understand the why. And it just takes a little bit of time. And as adults, we're ashamed of not being able to be good at something immediately, so we don't do it. And therefore we're not interested because it doesn't come as naturally to us. And kids are given the framework and the time to get good and level up, and we grow out of that at some point. Many of us do, and it no longer becomes a thing. But authenticity is so important. I've seen so many people who are trying to get into esports and getting to different vast facets of video gaming, and they have no passion for gaming for real. And they're just like, oh, I see the dollar signs. There's a teenage boy that just won $3 million on Fortnite. I got to get in on this. And that's fine. But for some reason, I feel like with video games, unlike other industries, business people don't necessarily completely do all their like as a immersion into this space. And I think that it's sort of important when you start having conversations and designing ways that your brand, your business, your local organization can really impact the community you're a part of. So if you want to start an esports team, like what esports are you gonna, you know, around what the communities are different. RTS is different from FPS, which is different from the FGC, you know, and I'm pretty sure all you guys know what that means. So, but they're vastly different types of communities. So you can't just, you know, go into it without doing a little bit of research, without immersing, you know, the stakeholders into that process, without leaning into the community. And I've seen how that works time and time again. I was speaking to the product manager at Microsoft for the adaptive controller, for example. So instead of Microsoft being like, we know how to have an adaptive controller with a team filled with able-bodied people, they actually leaned into understanding how that works from a community perspective first before designing something for the community that they were trying to develop. So I mean, I know that probably seems like common sense, but I think that a lot of people kind of bypass that because, you know, patience and money is a hell of a thing. And like, if you don't got no patience and you can see a way to make a lot of money, like fuck all these people, you know what I'm saying? So, and then you end up in a situation where your transparency, your authenticity is questioned. Like, are you really for this community? And if it's found out that you're not, as Nicola said previously, you're not going to be successful in the long term, in my opinion. So I just like play games first, see where you want to go, which community you want to tap into, why you want to tap into that, and then develop a strategy around something kind of specific. Like instead of just being like, oh, we're gonna have a video game thing, Fortnite. Like, don't do that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point from a community standpoint. Another structural thing to keep in mind is, I think, you know, as esports in particular, but as gaming generally matures, we see many more levels of the ecosystem that apply to regionals that apply to regional communities, to regional groups. We've seen, you know, multiple esports take on a geolocation model over the last like 2 years. We've seen regional leagues spring up a lot more. And Ross, I know you guys work a lot at all levels of the ecosystem. Can we talk a little bit about how some of the regions can get involved?
Sure. Yeah, I think my assumption is you're kind of referring to kind of the franchise model that some of these esports leagues have taken. So just for those who aren't aware, Overwatch League, you know, which is another game in the ecosystem, you know, wholly owned and operated mostly in the States, took more of a traditional sports model when it comes to how they have kind of formed the league. So franchises, you know, venture capitalists essentially from various cities throughout the States bought into teams who then play kind of a series of games very similar to a traditional sports model. Call of Duty is the same way, obviously with a publisher that's based in the US. Being a European company, and I think we took more of the European kind of soccer football model, which is these teams are owned and operated in various different cities. And then essentially there's kind of a relegation structure. So there's probably, especially for games like Counter-Strike, which is probably our largest game from an audience and following standpoint, we don't really have so much of that regionality because the teams are based where they're based, and they come in and fly in and play at our various events. So yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting model. We'll see kind of which one works out. There are two different approaches. They've both worked in traditional sports. I think it's they have both their pros and cons. One thing I'll mention about Vegas as a whole, and maybe generally when ESL looks at cities and host cities, is, you know, from a Vegas perspective, I think you guys already have this kind of in your arsenal, which is hospitality. And again, we talked about it in the commandments, and it's the number one commandment is adding value. How as a city are you adding value to not only the tournament organizer coming into the city and from a venue and hotel and hospitality perspective, but also to the fan, right? And I think Vegas has a lot of that going for it already. You know, in my previous life was at the Pac-12 collegiate conference, and we hosted our basketball tournament in Vegas every year. And we heard from fans, I mean, you know, we were in LA in previous years, we heard from fans, Vegas is a destination, right? All of the other things around it encourage me to buy my flight from Salt Lake City or encourage me to drive from Los Angeles. And so I think there's a lot of value in that in esports, and just being completely transparent in the work that we've done with other cities and top tier cities in the country. We've gone to those cities more based on the fact that there's a large audience and less based on the fact that folks are going to want to come in to the city. There's other things to do. We have support from the city. I think that's another huge one. You know, we haven't really tapped into those tourism boards. So I think we've mentioned it a lot here. There's so much opportunity because the industry is so nascent, that Vegas can really has so many things going for it that will make esports, you know, a right destination. That it's just about education and it's about understanding. And I think Vegas could easily become so far ahead of most other cities, and could easily become an esports destination that publishers and tournament organizers and teams look to, you know, attract and look to execute events at, because you do have so many things going forward in that sense.
I 1000% agree with Ross on that one. Like Vegas, I've been waiting for Vegas to like just make it all come together, you know, like for both hardcore competitive gamers and casual gamers, because there's something for everybody there. And if the marketing and the business structure of everything is done right, like it just seems like the next, you know, logical step for a city like Vegas.
Yeah, totally agree. It has all of the elements, you know, to push it into the next level. I think we're all really excited to get back there in a real sense over the next couple of years. Okay, so we're nearly at the end of time, and I do want to end on a classic end cap for you guys. When you look to the next year ahead, with the hopes, you know, that things continue to stabilize and to get back to as, you know, as close an approximation of normal as we can expect. What do you think over the next year within gaming, within competitive gaming or community or development is going to be, you know, a real kind of defining guide or defining moment or something you are looking forward to when it comes to the industry? And Ross, I'll start with you, I guess. Oh no, Keisha, you ready to go? Got one in the chamber?
I mean, I'm just looking forward to again just the conversation being expanded for more marketing opportunities. So like right now, you know, again, if you're not a streamer or you're not a competitive gamer, for a person that's new, who's like, oh man, this looks interesting, I want to get into here, you know, this space, they have still some barriers of entry as far as like what community they're going to belong to, how are they going to fit in. And I think that this year is going to allow for more options for that. And I'm excited to see what those types of individuals will look like and what will be like their platform. I think there's like so many technology options to be a part of this industry in a technical way, in a creative way. And, you know, with esports being so young, I mean, we're not locked in. Like traditional sports, we're kind of like locked in. It's been like this forever, and it's always worked like this. It's worked like that forever. And like esports and video games is a little bit more flexible. There's a little bit more opportunity here, and like we can create what the future of this looks like together. I know that sounds really corny, but I believe that.
No, I dig it. Ross?
Yeah, I think the last few years have seen, trying to come up with a better word than fake or false, but a lot of following the dollars and a lot of investment that was just based on kind of false realities. And I think the stakes moving forward are going to be so much higher, and it's going to be very interesting. And I don't, you know, wish anyone unwell, but it's going to be very interesting to see the kind of correction of the industry, because as I mentioned, I think there were a lot of dollars and a lot of people in it for the wrong reasons, and who weren't willing to invest their, aside from money, invest their time and energy and resource into developing audiences and understanding the ecosystems. And all those things are going to be exposed pretty publicly, if they haven't already, based on the pandemic and just the way things are going. So I think on the one hand, it's going to be rough for those who didn't invest, but on the other side of the coin, the folks who are in it for the right reasons, the folks who have been, you know, putting their blood, sweat, and tears into this for years and years and years and haven't really seen their due, I think are going to be rewarded pretty handsomely. And so I think that correction will be something that, again, those who really are in it for the true reason that they're in it are going to be rewarded, and those who aren't are probably gonna kind of fly away. So I think that's an interesting piece. I think fortunately, I think ESL has been in this game for a long time and understands kind of the complexities and has made its mistakes. So I think we're in a great position to continue to succeed, but there's definitely going to be a correction. It'll be interesting to see kind of where everything shakes out.
All right, guys. I think on that note, we're going to wrap. Thanks to everybody for joining us. Hopefully it was insightful, interesting. Hope everybody's doing well in their respective homes and or offices. And thank you to the NVEA and to the university for inviting us. We appreciate the opportunity to chat.
Thank you all for
Thank you,
joining.
everybody.
Those of you still tuned in, please keep an eye out for emails for future events as well. Thank you so much to Nicola, Keisha, and Russ. We hope to, Ross, excuse me, I keep screwing that up. Have a wonderful day, wonderful week, and I hope we'll see you all soon.
Thank you guys. Bye.
Thanks,
so much,
everybody.
guys. Bye now.